Heroes with Paul Rosen.
Our diets, our Western diets in America are just really, you just don't realize how poor they really are.
What would you say to others who would like to feel better?
Sometimes you need to find the instruction. That's where the testing and everything comes in, because without that knowledge, there's no way I could have got to the point where I'm at today.
Straight talk about health.
And then I start preaching and telling them what I've been doing. And this guy named Paul Rosen has changed my life.
With your host, Paul Rosen.
By the way, the information contained in this program is not approved by the FDA, nor intended to treat, diagnose, or claim to cure any medical condition or disease as defined by Western medicine. However, skilled practitioners of many disciplines have found nutrition response testing to be a highly reliable supportive technology for assessing the health and fitness of the body's functional system.
In 1935, this boxer, James J. Braddock, won the heavyweight champion of the world, became the heavyweight champion. He was a 10-1 underdog. James J. Braddock, even during the time he was the champion of the world, had arthritis. This was a man who was a world-class heavyweight boxer, and he had that condition, yet he still succeeded at that level. What does that say?
Well, it says that he had arthritis and he succeeded at that level.
Well, okay. I think it says a lot more than that. We'll get into that this morning here on Health Matters with Paul Rosen.
So according to the Center of Disease Control, and I must preface this by saying not the most reliable source for information, but nevertheless, arthritis is the leading cause of disability in the United States. The CDC has found that each year, arthritis impacts the United States with 9,500 deaths. Who realized you could die from arthritis? But 750,000 hospitalizations, 8 million people with some limitation as a result of the conditions, 36 million ambulatory care visits, 49 million people with self-reported doctor-diagnosed arthritis, 51 billion in medical costs, and 86 billion in additional costs as a result of dealing with this arthritis, tendonitis, bursitis.
And as those numbers might suggest, arthritis is democratic. It doesn't strictly strike older people.
It can be experienced by anybody, basically.
Basically between the ages of 30
35,
and 60.
35, 40, and up.
Well, so what's going on, Paul? Why do we have this, I don't want to say epidemic, but why do so many Americans suffer from arthritis?
Well, I know you're not going to like my answer to this because it's the information that I give probably every single weekend, at least a dozen times, and that is that it's what you put in your mouth. Yes, arthritis is not something you catch on a toilet seat, a doorknob, or anywhere else. Arthritis is the result of you eating foods that you shouldn't be.
At one time, did people really believe that touching the wrong doorknob could cause arthritis?
I hope not.
I hope not either.
But it's given what I know of the history of the human race, it wouldn't surprise me.
So arthritis is what? It's like an inflammation, is it not?
No, it's basic. Well, it's an inflammation. It is a condition whereby the body begins to create protective devices within itself from this inflammation or irritation.
So your body actually
think of a sorry for interrupting. Think of an oyster growing a pearl. The pearl comes about because of irritation. And as a result of the irritation of these the sand granules or other types of material that might get inside the oyster's shell, right, the pearl begins to grow.
That's interesting. So all those divers for centuries have been out there irritating oysters by telling yo mama jokes or something, trying to get them to generate pearls. Is that right?
I don't know if I can agree with that, but that's very funny.
So based on what you're saying, is arthritis kind of a condition that your body creates by trying to defend itself?
Yes, that's exactly right. And at the most severe and rheumatic arthritis, you've got a full-blown autoimmune process going on.
So all these things are making the condition happen. It's just your body creating a defense and therefore, unfortunately, creating pain in your body.
And it turns out that food is one of the most important factors, granules of sand, if you will, metaphorically, that begin the process of literally creating the arthritic pattern that you see.
Is
right?
arthritis then necessarily chronic? Once you're diagnosed with this particular condition, are you doomed?
Well, let's put it this way: the longer you go, the more abnormal growth that occurs. If the actual pain is caused by that growth, and that's one thing in my clinic that I've noticed, is that even with people come in with long histories of arthritis, still obtaining a personalized nutritional healing program can eliminate completely or reduce dramatically the experience of pain.
You mentioned bursitis. Is that necessarily related to arthritis? Or are they two different things?
Well, they're affecting different parts of the body, technically.
Can you
the
have
bursa is a little pad, little cushion between the joints.
So can you have both of them simultaneously?
You can have them all at once. Absolutely.
And tendonitis, I assume, relates to your tendons. I'm going to take a wild guess there, go way out on a limb, and figure that's the case.
You know, Rod, I knew there was a reason I hired you.
There you go.
It's pain that is reflective of these three conditions. It's the pain that ultimately drives people to do something, and most of the time what they do is enter into a relationship with suppressive therapies, one of them primarily being medications. And this is the reason, one of the main reasons I do this show is to help people, number one, not enter that horror show, and number two, help them get out of the horror show if they're already in it.
Do medications necessarily provide temporary relief only?
May provide temporary relief, but with suppressive therapies, there are always these little things called side effects, which ultimately become not so little.
Right. So you never know what any particular medication is going to do for you that's unanticipated.
Well, let's talk about them a little bit because I think that's important to set the stage. NSAIDs basically are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications like ibuprofen, acetaminophen. Ibuprofen, Motrin would be an example of that. Acetaminophen, Tylenol would be an example of that. Naproxen, Aleve would be a sample of that. And then, of course, just plain old aspirin. But these things all have the potential risk of causing permanent kidney and liver and digestive damage, right? Spontaneous internal bleeding. Also, rebound headaches if they're used to eliminate a headache pattern, right? And the ibuprofen, for example, stomach ulcers, intestinal bleeding, heart disease, high blood pressure, lupus. I sound like one of those commercials on the television, right?
You sound like you're doing the disclaimer first.
Yeah. So, there are side effects. And, of course, we have been absolutely bludgeoned into believing that side effects are little teeny things that you may or may not get, and go ahead and enter into the horror show of what are considered to be less habit-forming pain relievers, NSAIDs.
And we should point out, those are all, you say less habit-forming, those are all over-the-counter medications that you've mentioned. Those aren't even the hardcore drugs.
Exactly. An estimated 17 million Americans take NSAIDs daily. Acetaminophen alone sends an estimated 56,000 people to the emergency room each year. NSAIDs are blamed for sending more than 200,000 Americans to the hospital every year and are linked to an estimated 16,000 deaths. So when you put an aspirin in your mouth, or you put an ibuprofen or naproxen or acetaminophen in your mouth, right? You're basically spinning the roulette wheel because you have no idea, nor do any practitioners of any kind know whether you will be the one that will be saddled with a permanent injury to organs, glands, or perhaps even end-of-life scenario. So I'm painting this picture because there is an alternative for most people, the overwhelming majority of people with respect to alleviating the pain. There is an alternative, and that alternative is to understand that you're a unique human being, and there is no one approach that will apply to every single person. So when you read an article about taking this or that, or this supplement, or eating that food, or whatever, and applying it to yourself, it's just like, throwing a bunch of stuff up against the wall to see if it sticks. But there's a way with the highest degree of certainty to eliminate that whole adventure. And I'm being kind when I use the word adventure. And that is to get in touch with somebody like myself that does a method of evaluation utilizing muscle testing, and make it personal, make it distinctive, make it personalized, so that we can identify the information that we need in order to address the condition without any side effect at all. Thus, instead of utilizing suppressive therapy or approach, we're utilizing root cause elimination approach.
I think some who may be suffering from, say, arthritis or bursitis are seeking temporary relief. So would it be okay, even if they're receptive to your ideas, Paul, and they should be, that they seek some kind of temporary relief in the way of medication, in the way of just an over-the-counter aspirin?
Well, it's not something I would do now that I know what I know, which is why I do the radio show, so you folks can know what I know. And that is that every time you put an aspirin in your mouth, you are potentially at risk for, internal spontaneous bleeding. Now, that freaks me out. And I don't think like that when, I take a supplement or an herb or a tea or something like that I've personally been tested for, because I know I will never have a problem with it. Ever.
Nobody gets up in the morning saying, hey, how about some internal spontaneous bleeding? That sounds like a great thing to do with our afternoon.
Now, if you're asking me, do I understand why somebody would utilize a suppressive therapy? Absolutely, I understand it. Pain is pain, and I'm not a big fan. But now there is a way to identify with the highest degree of certainty what the underlying root cause of the pain is.
Let's look at the other side of the coin. I know there's always a genetic component to any condition, but can we, with our careless eating habits, aggravate or even cause conditions like arthritis or bursitis?
I mean, arthritis, yeah, all of that. Absolutely. What you eat is the leading cause of experiencing these conditions, arthritis, bursitis, tendonitis. Absolutely, 100%.
So, as always, it's good to act preventatively as well as to make yourself better if you already suffer from the condition.
But the question is, how does a person know what to avoid? How does a person know what to eat? I mean, generally, I could say, shut down all concentrated sweeteners. Of course, if you have ongoing inflammation and you're experiencing arthritis, bursitis, and tendonitis, and if you're eating sugar or honey or maple syrup or, high fructose corn syrup or any other kind of sweetener, aside from perhaps maybe stevia, then, or monk fruit, then, you're doing yourself a big disservice. Yeah, eliminate it. Eliminate those sweeteners. Absolutely.
Typically, I associate something like tendonitis with athletes. So does that track? I mean, are athletes putting extra tension on their joints and on their tendons that would make that condition more prevalent.
Trauma can certainly have an influence, and of course it's trauma, right? You're doing something that your body really is not completely designed to do. I mean, the Iron Man contest is not, necessarily a smart or even wise thing to do for overall health, right? I mean, you're taxing your system not just to the max, but over max, for example. Well, it's the same thing with running or any other kind of physical activity. But we've got a simple thing for alleviating discomfort with that. Now, if you actually are doing it too often or too excessively, you just keep injuring the same parts of your body over and over and over. What does that do? That creates the oyster effect. And you can develop, chronic structural changes, which are not very useful.
Yeah, some athletes in particular find that, unfortunately, their bodies aren't going to cooperate with their will to win. They just wear themselves out. And if you're competing, especially at an Olympic or professional level, of course you're putting massive strain on your body in ways that most of us don't. I
mean, the super high professional athletes, you ask them after their career is over what it feels like to be them.
Yeah,
but we're not talking about those. I'm talking about, you folks, the like me, the everyday, ordinary individual that is experiencing chronic discomfort because of a joint pain or, a tendon pain. Or, for example, carpal tunnel syndrome is a wave around here, and everybody thinks it's because of repetitive motion strain. It's not. It's not.
So what is causing
the
carpal
repetitive
tunnel?
motion, right, is of course, may be creating some inflammation, but ultimately it goes back to vitamin B deficiency and the condition of the liver.
Yeah, and I think there's a perception, if not a reality, that carpal tunnel has become more common in the internet age because we are now using keyboards in this particular era more than ever.
I mean, if it was if that was the cause, the repetitive strain was the cause, then I should never get any results in my clinic with respect to that condition, and yet I do.
Is the repetitive motion then an aggravating factor? It takes maybe some pre-existing conditions we had or deficiencies, nutritional deficiencies, and really brings them to the fore because of increased use of keyboards in a way that it never had before.
Yes. So it is the slow but sure degeneration of liver and liver energetic function, right? And the depletion of the high-quality B vitamin, and I'm not talking about the vitamins that come out of a health food store.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but because we are so wired these days and because every office requires just about everybody to use a keyboard in some capacity, I would think if you have carpal tunnel, for example, or you can't type without pain, you're suddenly like the athlete who has tendonitis. You can't compete at the level you need to.
Well, that's what a carpal tunnel syndrome is, right, is a type of tendonitis. But the thing is, it's totally fixable with safe, natural, and effective strategies. Completely and totally fixable.
So we go from something, and I know somebody who has carpal tunnel isn't going to see it necessarily as not as serious as arthritis because it hurts. People who have carpal tunnel are in pain. But you go along that scale. You go from relatively minor treatable conditions to things that seem chronic like arthritis. And maybe in the end, though, you come to the same set of solutions.
I mean, utilizing surgery to deal with carpal tunnel is just absolutely crazy. It's crazy. Because once the surgery is done, then you may actually develop a chronic structural abnormality as a result of the surgery. And then you're really behind the eight ball.
Well, some may say, I have to be able to use my hands. I have to be able to use my keyboard.
Come and join us. Come and join us and get it fixed once and for all. And learn that you're doing it to yourself. You eat your way into carpal tunnel syndrome, folks. You do it. And then, of course, we didn't talk about the hard drugs, the addictive medications.
These are more prescription-based.
OxyContin, Vicodin, and the like, right? And, of course, if you're experiencing any of these things, asthma, COPD, sleep apnea, or other breathing disorders, liver disease, kidney disease, underactive thyroid, a history of head injury or brain tumor, epilepsy or other seizure disorder, low blood pressure, gallbladder disease, Addison's, enlarged prostate, urinary problems, mental illness, or a history of drug or alcohol addiction, do not, under any circumstances, begin the use of these narcotics.
Yeah, that list right there.
What? I mean,
any one item on that list is horrifying enough to make you stay away from Oxycontin.
Right. Exactly.
And you know
right.
what? Call me naive, Paul, but I don't understand at all. With all we know about opioids at this point, like Oxycontin, why would you ever go there?
Well, because pain will drive you to do just about anything. I mean, you know, when a person is experiencing pain that's never ending, for them perhaps 24/7. You know, other than jumping off a building, right? The intervention of a narcotic is a lesser of those two evils.
Well, but I guess then you rationalize everything else. The fact that you can become addicted and the fact that you could create this massive list of more serious health problems.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is I understand it. I get it. Believe me. But I'm telling you there's another way. I'm giving you the opportunity to change your life, to eliminate the medications and get on a course of handling the root cause. Now, have I been 100% successful with everybody? I would say that's not true. Not primarily because I couldn't be, but because people are people. And the types of changes, the lifestyle changes that one must make, there has to be a little bit of self-discipline involved. You got to stop eating sugar. For most, you have to stop eating most of the grains, if not all of them. And for some of the more severe ones, you might even have to eliminate fruit for some period of time.
Is that because of the sugar content?
It's because those things put the liver is involved. Fibromyalgia is a perfect example. That's all liver and thyroid. All of it. Which means you have an unhappy liver and you have an unhappy thyroid. And the one thing that isn't going to make either of them happier is to put more pressure on them. And when you eat a lot of high glycemic foods, like grains, like fruit, like sugar, that puts an enormous amount of pressure on the liver.
Well, I think a lot of us aren't aware, too, of the presence of sugar in many of the foods we consume, and especially the whole thing about fruit. I know you're big on the sugar content in fruit being harmful. Most of us think we're okay with having an apple, but maybe not necessarily.
And I'm not saying that these changes might have to occur over the rest of your entire life. Maybe they will. But given the fact that you're already experiencing chronic pain and you're willing to take a medication that I have already gone through has potentially horrendous consequences. What's a candy bar that you might miss? Or a cookie, for Pete's sakes?
I think if somebody's in pain, though, they may seek comfort foods, and candy bars and cookies and that kind of thing would be high on the list. And I know that's no excuse, but I think it does explain certain behaviors. When we know things are bad for us, we'll reach for them anyway because they provide some kind of mental relief, if nothing else.
Perhaps, but it's short-lived like every addiction. You got to go back and do more. And then you're in the chicken and the egg cycle where it only gets darker and darker.
Right. And
this show is about lighter and lighter. So I invite people who are tired of that cycle of bleakness and get into a cycle of wellness.